Are the 19Ts really that much better than the 17Ts? Stay tuned to find out if it's really that much better. Right, this definitely could have been bad. It is not even on the turbo. Guys, welcome back to another video. This one's going to be a little bit different because we're moving away from the Jeep and going back to the BMW. It's a 2008 BMW 335 Xi E92, and currently it's basically full bolt-ons along with upgraded 17T turbos. One issue that I've been having with these eBay 17T Viv turbos is that currently they are about 3 years old and have about 25,000 miles on them. I have noticed I'm not able to get as high of a boost as I was targeting before. Just one day I couldn't target 24, 25 PSI any longer. And then it started puffing out smoke every time I let off the gas. I did check for you know, vacuum leaks, boost solenoids, PVC valve. So I figured the next step would be replacing these eBay turbos. So I did get some 19Ts of version 4. So they're the ones that disconnect or unbolt from the manifold. So let's go ahead and check those out.
Disclaimer: all the torque specs listed are what I found online. Do your own research if something doesn't seem correct. There are many different sources with different values of torque specs. Also, BMW uses a lot of aluminum bolts that are recommended to be changed whenever removing. I myself only replace the water pump bolts. Lastly, a lot of the torque specs online say to torque to degree, but you should only do this with new bolts.
Here we are to check out the new 19T turbos. These are purchased from eBay. They are not the Viv version, but they say they are the version 4. And you can see that it unbolts from the actual manifold, the turbo housing does. So that's kind of shown in the newer version 4. So hopefully these eBay turbos were upgraded just like the Viv turbos were supposedly upgraded. Time will tell, but they are actually a pretty good looking turbo, but that's what I said about the 17T Viv turbos that I currently have on the car right now. They did last me a good 25,000 miles at about 24 PSI of boost. So I really, you know, 3 years on $1,000 turbo is not bad. And I've even got the spool helix on there, so I've been kind of pushing them. Definitely could say that. So today we're going to be pulling off these turbos. I'll go over the torque specs of everything. That way you can follow along and kind of do it yourself with having all the information in one quick video. On the video description I will post all of the torque specs that I use. So be sure to check that out. That way you've got them all in one handy spot for you. And one more thing, this is an all-wheel drive car, so I will show you some of the differences that we have to deal with when changing the turbos when you have the X-Drive. It's a little bit tighter up there, the downpipes, you don't have as much room. All right, so let's start taking the tires and getting some work done. Since I have these aftermarket inlets, I don't really have enough room to kind of get up under here to take off the boost solenoid and this little heat shield. So we're gonna start underneath the car. We'll take off the subframe and we'll be able to lift up the engine a little bit. It'll tilt it over and that'll give us more room to take off these inlets and then actually get to the upper exhaust manifold down there. You can see how I have the actual tool on here. This is like the tow hook, but this is what we use to support the engine. Then I have this brace from Harbor Freight. Used it many times already and it works perfectly. Another difference with the all-wheel drive version is we got this big skid plate here we need to take off. So we'll need to remove that, but first we will remove all the plastic covers. And then we also need to remove these control arms. 21mm tie rod. Control arm that is a 19mm. We'll have to hold the other side of the bolt with a ratchet or wrench. Then you gotta undo the rear control arm. It's a 19mm. keep all your bolts organized. And you gotta take off the sway bar, 17 millimeter. And then you can repeat all of this on the other side. Don't forget your headlight level adjustment. That is on the driver side. That's attached to one of the lower control arms. That way you don't break that off. 10 millimeter nut. All right, under the front of the car, we've got these power steering lines. We've got a coolant hose, and we've got the sway bar. They kind of put these weird brackets in here. So what I would suggest is taking out these little 10 millimeter bolts. There's 2 of them. And then you can reach up on top. Hard to see with the GoPro. Behind these brackets up on top there are 2 10 millimeter bolts. There's one on this side, and then again there's one on this other side up above. The next step, you'll be able to remove the sway bar to kind of fish it out of these lines. So it's a little bit tight, kind of a weird thing they do with the all-wheel drive version. Angle that I'm putting this wrench up here. I'm using a ratcheting wrench. One more bolt right there that holds the water lines. That is on the driver's side. So now you could take off the sway bar. And it is a 13 millimeter socket for those bolts. The next bolts are for the rack and pinion. These are E12s, or inverted Torx 12, and you gotta hold the top side of it with a 16 millimeter wrench. There's a nut up top there, and there's 2 of those, one on both sides. Next, we need to remove the bolts from the motor mounts. I'm leaving the motor mounts attached to the motor first, and I'm removing the bolts out of the bottom of the subframe. 2 E12 Torx. Passenger side, you have to remove this little shield before you can remove the subframe. Alright, one main difference with the all-wheel drive version is if you look real close, the way the rack and pinion go onto the subframe can't just come out directly down. It actually gets pinched between like 2 brackets on the subframe. So the actual rack and pinion has to get removed towards the rear of the vehicle first. So you can see if I like stuck a pry bar in here, you can see how it moves outward. That's the direction it has to go before the actual subframe can go down. So, see how it's cleared now? You gotta do the same on both sides. That's what makes this a little bit tricky. And then to hold the rack and pinion towards the motor, you just get a little bungee cord to hold it up. You can use it from the tie rod ends. Do it on both sides. Alright, next we need to remove the 6 bolts for the subframe. 18 millimeter bolts. Just make sure you leave, 2 of them or 1 of them on each side in to hold it up until you get some support under here to lower it down. At this time, you want to take up some slack onto the motor brace so you can start to lift up the motor. Alright, I've got the jack under the cross member or subframe to support it. So you can go and take out the last bolt. Alright, then you can start to lower it down. Should be able to move it forward enough to get the rack and pinion out from it. So I had to stick a little pry bar up in there to get that out from those the bracket there. This is the driver's side. These are the brackets that I was talking about, the rack and pinion slip underneath there. So you gotta slide it backwards so that way this piece can go down. And then those are those 3 little 10mm bolts that are up top. Alright, at this point we can remove the thermostat housing, the water pump, and then we're going to have to remove this other engine mount. First we'll remove the downpipes. I'm going to drain the oil and the coolant right now. Thermostat disconnected. Got the water pump all the way out. Got the V-bands loosened up. I'm actually going to try to leave the O2 sensors in there. And you'll have to kind of tap them free because sometimes they get pretty stuck on the actual downpipes. This one's loosened. This one I gotta kind of break free. You gotta undo the bolts from the actual stock exhaust. Whenever you're messing with the V-bands, it's best to actually push the V-bands onto the actual turbos first, and that will get it up out of the way. That way you can sneak down the actual exhaust. Alright, and I was actually able to get the downpipes down with the sensors still in them. Kind of just makes it reinstalling a little bit easier. Don't have to worry about mixing nothing up. So now we're going to remove the 1, 2, 3, 4 Torx bolts to get the actual motor mount off the motor. This definitely could have been bad. See this rear turbo inlet? It is not even on the turbo. One little puddle could have sucked up as much water as it wanted to. We have officially made it to the turbos. What we're going to start by, we're going to remove this water pipe, remove these feed lines here, remove the outlets, a couple oil drainage lines, oil feed line that goes behind, you know, a couple things we got to do. So we will just keep on taking things apart. Right, we've got that water pipe out, we've got the outlets disconnected, the inlet's disconnected even though this one wasn't even on the turbo. So now we're going to work on getting these different oil and coolant inlets and outlets disconnected from the turbos. We'll remove the boost solenoids and then we'll be able to remove most of these manifold bolts from the top. I've got most of the oil lines loosened up. There are some oil feed lines on the top side of the turbo that I left. Coolant feed line that connects to the block on the top side. I took it off the turbo, but I left it connected to the block. Same with the rear side. Here's that other coolant line that I left in the actual block. If you get it spinning before you put it on the actual bolt, it will help break it free. Make sure you got all of your bolts out. Alright guys, this part of the video I wanted to do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison compared to the 3-year-old 17Ts from Viv or the brand new 19Ts, the V4 version 4. So let's you can already see comparable difference in size. Like look at the actual exhaust manifold here. It doesn't actually narrow down real tight, kind of like this one does. Alright, so let's take a measurement from here. We'll zero it out. And then we'll go to the same spot on this turbo. 156 thousandths bigger, the actual thickness of the hot portion of the turbo. You can see it in there. Let's see how narrow it gets coming off the manifold. And then I would say this is probably the most narrow spot right here. So it's 57 thousandths. I think it gets feel like it gets tighter. Like even right here. It doesn't measure as too much bigger, but it doesn't have such a big bottleneck. Like this kind of portion where right here it gets real tight in there, and this kind of stays a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and measure the actual inlet. So let's start with this one over here. Zero it. And let's go to this one. So this actual inside of the inlet portion is 69 thousandths bigger. So it's actually bigger on here too. They are both the 2-inch inlets, but the 19T is bigger actually. So there is a little bit of a difference there. Measures 1 inch and 800 thousandths. And let's go over to the 17Ts. 1 inch and 730 thousandths. Next part I want to measure is the cold side of the turbo. Let's zero it. Measure in the same spot. And those are fairly the same, so I'd say they definitely seem to be good quality. They are like the rivets here. The blade count's the same on both. The design's a little bit different. One thing actually is these 17Ts, when I bought them, the wastegate on one of them was sticking. So I actually had to take the turbos out a year after, not even a year, 6 months after owning them, and I had to buy new actual wastegates to put inside there. So I had actually, you can see I welded that on there. It was the same on both of them. Can't see the other ones on the other side, but so that's not fun. It was actually sticking, so it would tighten and it would stay closed. So that was not a good issue to have. So I don't think there's a lot more slop in these, so at least I won't have that issue. And then the last difference that I noticed, I want you to look at this housing. Okay, you can see, let's take this off so we can have a comparison. See the bolt pattern here? Kind of see the size of this? And let's go to the other one. And look at the size of that housing difference, like this portion of it compared to that. Get a little measurement going. Zero it. It is almost half of an inch bigger. So that is quite a big difference in that portion too. You can see this little V-band compared to this one. That is a big difference. Tiny, not so tiny. All right, now it's time to start prepping the new turbos. So first we're going to check the wastegates and make sure that they close evenly to each other. So I got a little vacuum tester, so we will squeeze the trigger, and what I want to look for is the actual comparison between the two. I don't want one to close at a certain number of vacuum and the other one to be different. I want them to be exactly identical. So we will check that. They should be somewhere around 4 to 7 from what I've seen online. I test it by making, when I can't spin this anymore, the actual wastegate. So I will get those checked, make sure they're even. So you can see I'm at, let's say 5, and I cannot spin it anymore. I want to find the exact number where I can't spin it, make sure it's exactly the same. So we are gonna check that before we install them. Alright, so I just checked on each wastegate. It looks like each one closes at -4 vacuum. So that is, that's fine. As long as they're exactly even is the big issue. So they are even, so no issues here. Next we can transfer the oil fittings from the old turbos onto the new ones. But first you will want to change out your O-rings on all the fittings. And then when you change them out, make sure you put new O-rings on there, and then you'll want to dab them in oil to make sure they don't get cut or anything when you reinstall them. Alright, so I've got the rear oil line bolted on to the back of each turbo. That is one that you can't really get to once it's in there. On the rear turbo, I did put on the vacuum line. That's pretty hard to get to once it's installed. The front turbo, you can easily get to that. I have all the O-rings changed out. Since I'm reusing these lines, I made sure to blow some air through it. Make sure they're clear of debris. Put the exhaust manifold gaskets on, and then I checked the studs to make sure they were all tight and the actual engine block. Now we can install the turbo. Alright, so I got the front turbo all torqued down. That is 20 Newton meters is the actual brass nuts, 20 Newton meters, and then I would check them all 2 to 3 times just to make sure they're all evenly torqued. And as soon as you tighten one, the other one might have more to tighten. So check them all several times. We've got the oil drainage line already hooked up. I left this bolt in here. I didn't change this gasket. I did a couple years ago, but it's kind of tight to get out of here with the all-wheel drive system. I got the coolant lines hooked up with that one that I left in the block. It just kind of makes it easier sitting in there and then connecting it up. Next I'm going to make sure to get the vacuum line hooked up. Don't want to leave that for last. And then we will get over and get the other side hooked up. Little issue I'm having, this back water line is touching the wastegate bracket, so I'm gonna have to take that off and do a little bit of clearancing. This is on the rear turbo. Alright, so I marked where this was actually hitting the water line, so I could just take a grinder, make sure all the ports are plugged up. And just like that, it should fit perfectly. Alright, so I got both turbos bolted on, torqued down, all the fittings bolted onto the turbos. I'm going to start fishing the air intake down there. There's kind of not a whole lot of room back there, so it'll be tight. Alright, we are getting closer. We have the outlets on. I put this little heat shielding around the silicone part of it, just to prevent that from deteriorating or getting too hot and melting. What we need to do next is install the water jacket and finish installing all these water lines that go to the turbo, bolt in all the different accessories. And then the next step will be to reinstall the motor mount, and then we're going to reinstall the downpipes. And then at that point we'll be able to go back up front here and do the water pump and the thermostat housing. Gotta do the motor mount first before we do the downpipes, because the downpipes will be in the way to bolt up the motor mount. Alright, next we need to get these downpipes put in here. So it's gonna be tight, but that is the next step. Alright, so I got the motor mount on, downpipes on, tightened down, and I've got the downpipes attached to the actual exhaust. Next steps, the water pump, thermostat housing. Alright, water pump and thermostat housing are installed. Next step, the subframe. So I've got the subframe down underneath it, supported by a jack and a piece of wood. If you go to the passenger side and get one bolt in on the rear bolt hole, put one of the long bolts in there for temporary. Our goal is to get the rack and pinion back inside that bracket I was showing you. So we need to lower the subframe enough to be able to slide this rack and pinion in there. If you bolt the subframe all the way up before you do this, or before you put the rack and pinion in that bracket, you will not be able to get it in there. So we have it lowered down, supported with one bolt in the corner. That way we have enough room to do any twisting or pulling or anything we need to do. Stick a pry bar in there and just like that, get started on the side of the bracket. And then the other has a lot more room, so it's already like ready to go into that actual bracket. Once we lift it and raise it, it will fall into that. Help guide it in there, just like that. We'll go look at the other side and make sure it's in there. And the driver's side is ready to go in there too. We're starting the middle one. And you can take this one out. Alright, so I got the subframe. All the bolts are in there, but they're not tightened up. It's still lowered down about an inch. That'll just give me a little bit more space to work on some of these bolts. So the first thing we're going to do is get the sway bar bolted up, or the sockets at 13 millimeter. Alright, next we can get the bolts for the rack and pinion in. The other one started. Next I will start the motor mount bolts. Alright, so now we can get all these power steering lines and water hoses bolted up with these little 10mm bolts. Start with the front facing ones to the hard plastic water lines. Next we can tighten up the power steering or the rack and pinion bolts. Remember, you gotta hold the back nut with a 16mm wrench. Next you can tighten up the 6 subframe bolts. Now you can loosen up the engine support and then you can remove it. Next you can go and tighten all your motor mounts. Alright, next we need to get the control arms in. Alright, then we need to get the front control arm in. Then you can do your tie rod and bolts, tighten these down. And then what'll be next is the sway bar. And then don't forget this little light lever sensor. And then you will repeat on the other side. Just remember not to tighten up these control arm bolts all the way until you have the car sitting at ground level. So you want to put the tires back on, lower it onto the ground, maybe put it on some boards. That way you can get up under there and then you can tighten these down. Now that we've got the control arms all bolted down, they're not tightened all the way because we have to lower the car first before we can tighten those. We can now add oil and then we're going to add coolant. We're going to flush the coolant out. There's a procedure that you do to run the actual water pump, and that will flush all the air bubbles out of the system. Runs for about 10 minutes, and then we will turn the motor over without actually allowing it to start. That way we can prime the turbos. Make sure to apply a little bit of oil to the new seals before installing. While you're doing this, check on the bottom, make sure nothing's leaking. I haven't put on the plastic covers yet, just so I can make sure to check for leaks. And you can start adding your oil. Alright, now that we've got it filled with oil and coolant, we can do the coolant flushing procedure. Alright, car off, keying the ignition, heater on, the blower motor at the first setting and heat at the max. And then hold down the pedal for about 10 seconds. And you can hear it doing its thing. So this will run for about 10 minutes. You can put a battery charger on it to make sure the battery stays good. I've got a brand new battery, so it should be good. The coolant system is done priming, so now we need to prime the turbos with oil. What I've done is I've unplugged each injector. That way I can attempt to start the car, letting the starter and the motor turn over so we can prime the turbos with oil. Let's go ahead and get them primed. Alright, now the turbos are primed, it's time to start it. All that is left is putting on all the plastic guards, tires. We're going to set it down on some blocks and then we will torque down the control arms when it's on its own weight. And then we'll be able to take it for a test drive. I let it idle for about 10 minutes. That way I could check for any type of oil leaks or any type of leaks. And there are 0 leaks, so make sure you do that before you put on all the undercarriage. Next video I will be driving it and testing out the turbos, and I will let you guys know what I think of them. Hopefully everything goes good with driving, and then we will be looking at changes we need to make for the tune. So if anyone's interested in learning changes on Tuner Pro, those are going to be the next videos that I try to make. Kind of giving a little bit of introduction to Tuner Pro for some DIYers. Alright, well again, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, and don't forget to like and subscribe.